Welcome back to Cambro Conversations. And today's conversation, we are joined by a man with a wide array of experience within the fitness industry, a 5-time world record powerlifter, precision nutrition and Westside Barbell certified coach, and a man that has a Bachelors of Science in Health and Behaviour Science, Mr. Jordan Syatt. Jordan, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, and it's getting towards my digital switch off, but when you've got a man like Jordan Syatt that you can get in the diary, you're always keen to make the time zones work. So we're delighted to have you, Jordan.
What time is it where you are, man?
It's just after 8, but I'm trying to be strict these days with like screens and stuff like that. I don't know what you're like, because obviously, well, you run a much bigger Instagram than I do, but you can get sucked down the black hole of phones and laptops and whatnot.
Oh, bro, it's bad. It's bad. You can really 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, just be like stuck to your phone, eyes to the screen, constantly wake up. First thing you look at. I've had to make it like a deliberate practice to make sure it's not the last thing I do before I go to bed and the first thing I do when I wake up. Like I have to do something else other than looking at my Instagram, because it's very easy to get sucked into that world.
Yeah, that dopamine hit at that time of the day, both waking and before bed, it's just so disruptive to everything that you've got on. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of the principles that you've got in place for clients that are a little bit like that as well. But even for yourself, running a business like yours and all the different fingers you've got in all these different pies, you need to kind of nail that sleep variable too.
100%. Absolutely, bro.
So we've given you a little bit of a background there. It's always nice when you introduce somebody in a podcast that's got so much to them. But how do you think that wide array of things that you've done over the years in the fitness industry sets you up now as an authority in the space?
Man, that's an interesting way to phrase the question. I've done hundreds, not thousands of podcasts. No one's phrased it like that. I think the biggest thing for me has been I made sure from an early age that I was surrounding myself with people that were significantly smarter than I am. I got my first internship when I was 14 years old. I was wrestling at the time. I started wrestling when I was 8 years old. And by the time I got to high school, I made varsity as a freshman, and I needed to make weight. I needed to get stronger, but I had no idea how to do it. So I reached out to a gym nearby and I asked them if I could intern with them. I'll take out the trash. I'll clean out the floor. I'll clean the floors. They were like, yeah, sure. Come on in. And I did that over and over and over again for the first 5, 6, 7 years in the industry, just making sure I was constantly surrounded by people who were way smarter than I am. And I think that's what's allowed me to become an authority in the industry, is not necessarily because I'm super smart, because candidly, I don't think I am. It's because I've been able to surround myself with people who are very, very intelligent. I've been able to take their ideas and I've been able to apply it to a variety of different people. I think one of the things that realistically is an unfortunate aspect of social media, but it's true, is just because someone's really smart doesn't mean they're going to be great at getting their message out there, right? There's sort of this aspect of just because you're a great coach doesn't mean you're really good at getting your message across, doesn't mean you're really good at helping people online. And I think I've been able to bridge the gap between the unbelievably smart, intelligent coaches and also maybe the people who are really good at getting their message out, but they suck at coaching, right? So I think I've been able to sort of take the best of both worlds and put out a science-based piece of information that can help a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'd picked up from your content over the years is that you are obviously a very intelligent man, although you're downplaying yourself there, but you've taken knowledge from all these different sources. But that balancing act that you've got there, you educate a lot with humor, wigs, etc. for starters. Why that path rather than maybe your more stone-faced delivery that you could do?
You know, I love these questions. I think if you look back, I started making content in July of 2011. That's when I started making content. So almost 10 years. If you look at the first 6 years of content, you'll see more of a stone face. You'll see more of a stone face. You'll see more of a what might be perceived as a culturally professional aspect of delivery. One thing I've done since I was a kid, my mom will tell anybody, is I've always done accents. I've always done characters. Like I was an athlete growing up, but I loved acting. I loved doing different voices and doing impressions. That's just who I've been since I was a kid. I remember when I was like at Hanukkah and Passover and doing all these holidays with my family, my family members, my dad, my aunts, my uncles, they'd say like, do this impression and do this impression. And they would they'd point at me and say an impression. I'd have to do it on the spot because I loved doing it. So it's part of who I am, but also I realized that as I'm an educator. Like part of being a coach is being an educator. And I noticed that it's one thing to educate people, just telling them the facts. But if you can't keep them engaged, then they're not going to learn. And I was in special education growing up. Like I was not a smart kid. I was not good in the way the school systems are set up. So I had to learn in a way that was very unique. And I realized that how I learned is often how a lot of people will learn, but the current educational system is not set up. So I learned in a way that was very entertaining. I learned in a way that was very captivating. And I took that over into how I teach on social media.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that looking back at your childhood, you can see where your skill set in that space has now been kind of transferred here. And I suppose you're saying there, your kind of initial delivery was quite stony-faced, professional being the kind of key term. I work in the corporate world away from the podcasting world. And there is an element of, we have to be quite straight-faced talking about insurance and risk management, but you need to also bring like an element of humor to different meetings. Because at the end of the day, in my space, people buy from people, but also people get educated by people as well. So the way that you bring this high-level scientific information, and I hate the term dumbed down, but you bring it in a funny form, and the wigs play a big role in that. So I thought I'd be keen to ask you, like, what's the kind of favorite characters that you do play within your social media?
I think my two favorites are, number one is Kenzie Morgan's. She's the blonde wig. She was my first ever like real character. I remember it took me about a week to come up with her name. Just like coming up with her name was like a big deal. Like constantly thinking like, what's a really good name for this like fitness influencer type of a thing. And I think it took me so long to come up with a name because I really had to connect with her. Like almost like if you speak with an actor, they really have to connect with their character. So Kenzie Morgan's, I think, is my favorite. And then Johnny Bag of Donuts is my other favorite. So I have a female, I have a male character. I have other characters as well. I have an Australian character named Dick Tiny. I have a bunch of other characters. I have some that I'm Jewish. I have a Jewish character named Rabbi Herman Blumberg, who actually is inspired from a rabbi that I had when I was a kid. Right. I have a bunch of different characters, some that I have not yet been brave enough to relay to the public for fear of critique. But I think my two favorites are Kenzie Morgan's and Johnny Bag of Donuts. I think because they're the cliche, right? They're the most cliche. Kenzie Morgan's is the cliche, like blonde, and Johnny Bag of Donuts is the cliche gym bro. And so they're very easy to put into any scenario.
Before we dive into some of the more meaty topics, Jordan, what are some of the key lessons that you think you can teach with Kenzie, for example, who is your typical female fitness influencer or your typical gym bro in the other space?
Oh man, it's endless. It's endless, right? I mean, for example, one of the more popular videos I did with Kenzie was about keto and the keto diet, and about how like how ridiculous it is and how unsustainable it is. I mean, it's sort of how like it's made out to be something that it isn't, and it's for example, the video that I did with Kenzie about keto is I took like the spray butter, like I can't believe it's not butter, and I like sprayed it onto my food, and I sprayed it into a water bottle, and I was like, look, it's even better because this one has low calories. I think there's a lot of shock value to it. People just aren't, not to mention whenever I do a Kenzie character, I always make sure I have a little bit of a beard going. So, I mean, you see a dude with a beard and a long blonde hair wig, like it's automatic shock value to it. And then the Johnny Bag of Donuts character, super like my shirt is way too tight. Like it shouldn't be that tight, backwards baseball cap and just ridiculous over the top New York accent, like Jim Bro. There's no shortage of things I could talk about, whether it's nutrition, whether it's strength training, whether it's mindset, weighing yourself on the scale, seeing fluctuations go up, doing like an inordinate amount of bicep curls in the squat rack, whatever it is. Like you can bring any topic into it and make it funny and educational and engaging to really keep people to make people laugh, but also to really make them think and become critical thinkers.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable mission you've got, really, to educate through humor and get people to be a bit more critical thinking and really challenge the narratives. Because I suppose the audience that listen to this are quite informed already if they've chosen to click on a podcast about self-development, fitness, business, whatever it is. But when you look around within your office or you look around within your friend groups and your families, you realize the actual understanding of fitness, we're almost in a little bit of a bubble where what you're
Yes, we
talking,
are.
what you're talking about is genuinely common sense to me because I've been consuming fitness content for 10 years, probably since you were making content, Jordan. But if you speak to somebody in the office and the lady wants to lose 2 stone for a wedding coming up in the summer, she's considering the keto diet. She's considering no carbs after 6. Whereas maybe if I see that on my feed, I'm thinking, oh, people already know that. I mean, that's great, Jordan, but who's that actually helping? But the actual fact of the matter is the majority of people don't know these things.
Correct. They have no idea. It's one of the things I struggled with early on in my career, especially as a fitness professional. I think the reason that I was more quote unquote professional in my earlier years is because I was trying to impress the people whose content I was reading, right? So Eric Cressy, Dan John, Pavel Tsatsouline, all these people who I like admired tremendously, and I still admire to this day. I read their content and it was so impressive to me. And it was so scientific and so research based. I was like, I need to be like them. So my content was written in a way that I hoped would impress them. But I didn't realize that if I really want to help the most amount of people, trying to impress the very small percentage of people who already know this stuff is a complete waste of time. I should be really addressing the people and speaking to the people who don't know this stuff, who have no idea about it, who they don't even know where to look. And that's where the wigs and the characters come into play. Because if I'm going to post something about nutrition or strength and conditioning online and hope that people who don't know anything about it find it, I have to do it in a way that they're going to come across it. And if I start using super high level terminology and scientific ideas around, like, I don't know, upper and lower cross syndrome and anterior pelvic tilt, they're not going to find that. Like, why would they ever be searching that? But if they're searching keto diet, or if they're searching weight loss fast or whatever it is, like, then they'll see my stuff and then they're helped from it.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's the audience that you're looking to speak to, because like you say, most people are not selling training plans or coaching to somebody that's produced a scientific study, but that's maybe who you were trying to appeal to with using the really high level stuff. And I certainly fell in that trap when I first had Instagram and trying to post fitness content, almost like reciting studies by Alan Aragon or whatever. And
correct. Yeah.
Nobody that's reading that cares. And
they don't care.
That's the unfortunate kind of matter of fact, is that they'd much rather you distill down the terms into something that they can action day to day than you impress the 3 online coaches that you really look up to, that you've tagged in the post to be like, look how clever I am.
Well, it's like, I have a guy who does all of my finance for me, all my taxes, right? He takes care of everything. And he breaks down everything for me in terms of what the IRS is looking for, in terms of the forms that I need to fill out. If he was speaking in terms that other finance professionals understood, I would never work with him. I would have no idea. Same thing with lawyers, right? When you go to a lawyer, it's because you're hoping they're going to break down the law and they're going to break down what's going to happen in a very easy to understand way. Personal trainers are the same. Like, there's no reason for you to be speaking to your client or potential client like you would speak to a professional. And if it was that easy to understand, then you wouldn't have a job, right? Like, we wouldn't have a job if it was so easy to understand, because if people had the time and energy and desire to really research this stuff, they would do it on their own. They're looking for us not to speak to them like they know this stuff. They're looking to us to speak to them in a way that it's so easy to understand a 6-year-old could get it. And that's really the mark of a true expert. When you could take a very complicated topic and break it down into such simple terms that a 6-year-old could get it without question. And that's really what I think our goal should be, is to, because there's so much conflicting information and there's so much misinformation out there. It's very easy to understand why people would be confused. So that's one of the reasons I like doing characters, because when I take a character and I make a point that's so simple and so commonsensical, it's like, well, of course, for example, starvation mode. Like, oh yeah, if you go into starvation mode, you don't eat enough, you're going to gain fat. Really? Like, and then I'll bring in Johnny Bag of Donuts. I'll be like, who do you know who got fat from eating too little? And when you phrase it like that, people are like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. Nobody in the history of literally ever has ever gotten fat from eating too little. But when so-and-so said it on Instagram, I believed it. So now they can become a critical thinker. My goal is to help people be able to think on their own and critically think and analyze what's being told to them and what's being sold to them on Instagram, YouTube, et cetera, so they can realize, okay, is this worth my money and time and energy or not?
Yeah, and I think some of the ways that you've done that, and one of the ways that stands out to me is your 30-day Big Mac inclusive diet, where you can show the general population, the main kind of body of people that would tune into this kind of stuff, that you can pretty much include foods that they would deem dirty or unhealthy or dangerous to them. What was the kind of premise of this? How did it all go? And I'd love if you could share that with the listeners, Jordan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had this idea for years. I hated the documentary Super Size Me. It pissed me off to no end. It was unbelievably biased and cherry picked and narrative driven. And for whatever it's worth, I very much respect Morgan Spurlock, who made that documentary. I think he's a genius. I think he's tremendously good at what he does. The issue is, and I would love to have a conversation with him about this at some point, is he had an idea of what he wanted to get across by the end of that documentary. He wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking to make the point of which he was already convinced.
Yep.
Right. And this is the issue. Like, if you have one of the things about double-blind placebo-controlled studies is the researchers are just looking for the truth. They're not looking to make a point. They're looking for the truth. Morgan Spurlock was looking to make a point. And he was basically trying to say, this food is inherently bad for you. It's going to kill you. There's a lot of other like social stuff at play. Like, this company is bad. It's run by evil people. You shouldn't support this company. And without question, Super Size Me created far more fear around food and created so much disordered eating habits as a result of it than it did actual legitimate education. So I had this idea for years where I wanted to replicate Super Size Me in a way that actually made sense. So, for example, Morgan Spurlock, when he did Super Size Me, his goal was to replicate the average American lifestyle. And those are his words, the average American lifestyle. Well, I mean, first and foremost, he ate McDonald's every day, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Immediately, the average American doesn't eat McDonald's 3 times a day. Not even close. Like, maybe 1 time a day would have been more accurate, but even that would have been a stretch. Not only that, he completely eliminated any and all exercise, like all of it. He lived in New York City. I live in New York City right now. He was getting several thousand steps a day. He stopped. He started taking buses and cabs. So he stopped exercising of any and all sorts, which again is ridiculous. He was required to say yes every time someone asked him to supersize his meal. That's literally what the branding of the documentary was made on, Supersize Me. He was required to say yes, as though the average American or the average human being can't just say, oh, no, thanks, I'm good with the regular size, right? So all of these things stacked up. He was just trying to make a point that this is going to make you gain an obscene amount of weight and that this food is inherently bad for you. And I hated that because it completely went over the idea of moderation. It's either you're eating no McDonald's at all, or you're having it 3 times a day, every day, and you're eating in a gluttonous form. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to eat 1 Big Mac a day, every day. Personally, I would have preferred the what's it called? It's the one with pancakes for breakfast. What's it called? I'm completely forgetting it.
McMuffin?
The McGriddle. Yeah. So the McGriddle is my favorite thing there, but the Big Mac is the most internationally recognized food from McDonald's. So I chose the Big Mac because people are going to recognize it. So I ate 1 Big Mac a day, every day for 30 days straight. And it wasn't all I ate. I included other foods as well. But I wanted to show people that you can include your favorite foods in moderation, whether it's a Big Mac or a slice of pizza or a couple slices of pizza or a slice of cake. You can include your favorite foods in your diet and still make progress and be healthy. So over 30 days, while having a Big Mac every single day, I lost 7 pounds, whereas Morgan Spurlock had gained almost 30 pounds over that time frame. And the whole purpose of it was not to say that are healthy. The purpose wasn't to say that McDonald's is an ideal food choice. The purpose is to say, like, if let's say you're a single mother or a single father, you've got 2 kids in the back of your car, you're driving, your kids are screaming in the back because they're super hungry. You're going by McDonald's and you have to stop and get them food. Number 1, you don't feel guilty for giving your kids McDonald's. Number 2 is, you can have a meal from there and it's not a big deal. You can have a meal from there, make your kids happy, fill them up with food, get back on track, No big deal. Progress isn't made from a single meal. Progress is made from what you're doing over the long term. I think there's too much focus on each individual meal, each individual bite. This food is either good or bad, right or wrong, healthy or unhealthy. And there's so much focus on that we forget the larger picture. No one became healthy in a single day. No one became unhealthy in a single day or a single meal. It's what you do over the long term habitually. So I wanted to show people that over the course of 30 days, you can still include your favorite foods and make progress. And that's what the goal was. And I think I accomplished it.
Yeah, I think you can clearly see that you've accomplished that whole you're missing the forest for the trees approach. Like you say, this zooming in on one tiny part of your day or one tiny part of your month. Because if you look at a 30-day stretch where you're trying to lose 7 pounds, there's so many different meals that are going to be included within that, hundreds and thousands of calories. And to zoom in on like one occasion where you've had to stop at the drive-through with your kids, like you say, is just too kind of microscopically focused, because it might be that, like Morgan, they do no NEAT, they have no movement, they have no exercise. Of course, their calorie intake is going to be even more kind of prevalent than if they were actually very, very active. And likewise, where you're talking about like a Big Mac is one meal within an overall day, for most meals, you can kind of get away with a 500 calorie burger. By the end of a diet, maybe not. And I'm sure we'll get onto what that meant in terms of your overall intake. But a 500 calorie burger isn't complete. You're not completely bust at that point. It's if you were having the fries after it, the McFlurry after it, you're starting to get into the danger zone of perhaps going well over your expenditure for that particular day. But again, we've got much wider goals than that in terms of weeks, months, years.
Yeah, it's a good point, man. I mean, it's funny. People will tell me they're really nervous about going on vacation, right? They're nervous to go on vacation because they don't want to ruin all their progress, right? It's like, okay, you're going to Cancun for a fucking week. Like, you really think you're going to, like, for me, it's so mind boggling because there are people who spend their entire life sedentary. They eat junk food. They are very overweight. And after 20, 30, 40, 50 years of living a very unhealthy lifestyle, their doctors tell them, like, you're going to die if you don't change something. And after literally 20, 30, 40, 50 years of living this lifestyle, they make a change. They start walking more. They start eating a little bit better. And over the course of 2, 3, 4 years, they completely change their life. They change their body, their blood pressure, their blood markers, their lipid panels. They change everything, and they become healthy in a matter of a couple of years after spending 30, 40, 50 years like that. And you're telling me that you're worried that you're going to go on vacation for a week and ruin all your progress? You're out of your mind. And that's what things like Super Size Me instilled within people. They instilled that, God forbid you have a Big Mac, or God forbid you have a double cheeseburger from McDonald's, then all of a sudden you're going to lose all your progress and you're going to be completely unhealthy. It's ridiculous. It's completely unsubstantiated. And it does far more harm than good to instill this fear within people. It's fear mongering at best, right? It's like it's not accurate at all. And the more people can understand that health isn't a single meal, health isn't a single day, health isn't a single week, health is over the long term, then they can actually start to have a healthy relationship with food, a healthy relationship with exercise, and a healthy relationship with themselves.
The term relationship with food is an important one you brought to the table, Jordan, because when you are talking about people that are maybe scared of going away for a week on holiday, you do see occasions where they diet down really hard for their holiday and they do come back several pounds up because they've restricted so heavily in advance of that. I've had friends that have gone to Marbella, Ibiza, wherever, and they've come back, like, particularly if it's been an all-inclusive, almost like swollen because they've turned up quite lean, quite shreddy, get a few photos for the gram, you know the deal. And then they come back because they've had access to foods that they've restricted themselves heavily from. One of the things that comes from your approach is that you've had access to those foods, like a Big Mac, for example. So when you do get your hands on it on holiday, you shouldn't go crazy and have 3 or 4, or you shouldn't go crazy and have one and then want another one like an hour later. You should hopefully have some level of control and restraint because your relationship with food is not as stretched as if it was maybe as restrictive.
Of course. I mean, when you tell someone that something is off limits, the first thing they're going to do is want whatever you just told them is off limits, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but for me personally, my entire life, I've always wanted to pull a fire alarm. my entire life. Like it's not allowed. It's like, I just want to pull a fire alarm. And every time I go buy one, I'm like, oh man, I'd really love to pull that thing just because I've been told it's not okay to do unless there's a fire. Right. So it's like if you're told cake is off limits, if you're told pizza is off limits, if you're told donuts are off limits, if you're told whatever is off limits, then when you go on a vacation or whatever it is, and you decide you're going to have it, here's what happens. Once you have one bite of it, you've decided that you just screwed up. You've decided, you convinced yourself that, well, because I had one slice of pizza, because one slice of cake, all of my progress is ruined, because I've been told for the last 17 years of my life that that food is bad and that food is not allowed. So why would you bother staying on track if you just think you ruined all your progress? And then people use that to justify going completely off track and binging. They're like, well, screw it, I already messed up, so I might as well keep messing up. And that way then they completely binge for the entire weekend, whether maybe it's weekend, maybe it's a vacation, maybe they're on an all-inclusive cruise, whatever it is. And then they get back, they look super swollen. They had no self-control over the food. And then it's the easiest way to tell when someone has a really unhealthy relationship with food. This is why, I have a lot of respect for physique competitors, bodybuilders, bikini competitors, because they do some really hard things, but they have, as a community, not every single one of them, but as a community, they have the worst relationship with food I've ever seen in my entire life. And this is why you see physique competitors, bodybuilders, figure competitors, bikini competitors, they'll only post pictures of themselves when they were peaking for a competition. And they get so many pictures of themselves during that time, they just consistently post them all throughout the year. They might compete 1, 2, 3 times a year, but the only pictures they post are when they're at their absolute leanest. But you don't really see them in the off season. You don't see them. And if you saw them in person, you'd be like, oh my God, like you gained a lot of weight, which of course you can't maintain that level of leanness year round. But they've created this lifestyle in which they feel like they always have to be at their absolute leanest. So they only post pictures of them when they're at their leanest, which creates this false sense of truth for everyone following them, because everyone thinks, oh, you must be this lean year round, which is just completely and utterly inaccurate.
There's lots and lots within that, Jordan. I'm actually just scribbled down in my pad there. I don't do that often during a podcast, but I wanted to because you've said a lot there. The first of those is, you were saying about somebody maybe having an item of food that they've restricted themselves from. I'm sure you're probably familiar with James Clear's Atomic Habits, where when you do a particular action, it's a vote for the kind of person that you want to be. And almost this is it in its worst form. If you have a quote unquote bad food, like, I don't know, a big ice cream on holiday, that's become a vote for like, oh, well, everything else out the window. I am now the person that eats unhealthily. Whereas for the 12 weeks leading up, maybe they were voting to, oh, I'm a healthy person. I'm the person that takes the stairs. I'm the person that preps their meals before they go to work. I'm the person that says no to dessert when we're out for dinner because I've only calculated, I've only kind of made room for the main, so to speak. So I think it's really funny, and that's kind of Atomic Habits gone wrong there, but equally something that we can kind of use for positivity. On the competitor point, and this is where a lot of people know my stance on this kind of things. There's a very, very small number of people who can go through that level of process and hold it together longer term. And
correct.
I've got friends that have got an incredible shape for comps and come out and reverse dieted to the letter. They've added like 100 carbs a week or whatever it is, and they've reversed up and they've held great condition, and their off season's been super productive. I've had friends that the day after the show and the weeks after the show, they were eating a bowl of Oreos with milk for breakfast. They would never have done that, even at the height of their last like bulk or whatever you want to call it, their gaining phase,
correct,
4,000 or 5,000 calories. But because they hadn't had access to anything, they were like, yeah, my breakfast now it's not like a bowl of cereal. It's a bowl of Oreos I'm having. And they were putting on like 12 kilos a week at one point, and they just looked unwell. So I think it's a very interesting point that you raise, where even those that reach the absolute, what we would maybe term as the peak of physical condition, if you're holding up aesthetics as that, their relationship with food often comes as the main price of that.
Absolutely. 100% agree, man. And it's sad. It's really sad. And it's funny because it's not funny, but it's been interesting over my career as I've spoken about this. I've had people who are high-level physique competitors, very, very high-level professional physique competitors, who they originally start off messaging me angrily, like, what are you saying? This is so wrong. Da, da, da. You have no idea what you're talking about. And then 2, 3, 4 years later, they messaged me like, hey, you were right. I had a terrible relationship with food. I had no idea how bad it was until I've gotten to where I am now. It's one of those things that's hard to recognize when you're in the middle of it. When you're in, and not to mention, it's a huge hit to the ego to hear someone be like, listen, you have a really unhealthy relationship with food. When you're posting all these pictures on social media, you're shredded to bits. You're getting tons of amazing comments like, wow, your conditioning is amazing. You look incredible. It becomes who you are. It becomes part of the image that you're trying to become. So for someone to say like, yeah, but that person has a really terrible relationship with food, you can see because they never actually post current pictures of themselves. It's only the previous picture of themselves. Like, ask to see how they're doing now. Ask them if they're binging on Oreos every morning before they go to work out, whatever it is. It's a big hit to the ego. So it's been interesting for me as my career has progressed to speak with these people and empathize with them, because it's very difficult. And it's been actually super interesting to see lately, because a lot of the people who were walking around, like the men walking around at 5, 6, 7% body fat, and the women walking around at like 12, 13, 14% body fat a couple of years ago, are now walking around at a significantly higher body fat percentage. And they're doing the posts where they're like pinching their body fat and they're saying like, oh yeah, like I love my body as it is. And it's like, you're going on the complete opposite end of the spectrums here. And you're not giving people the truth. You're just really going based off of emotion right now. It's been very interesting to watch the progression of social media.
Yeah, they need to be very careful about assigning their identity to what gets the most likes and the most engagement.
Correct.
It's a very unhealthy approach to take. And I think hopefully anyone listening to this is glad that I've never gone down that route. There's a massively kind of buzzword within the industry of mindful eating. What does that mean to you, Jordan?
Mindful eating, I'm okay with. Mindful eating for me is just being aware of how much you're eating. Mindful eating is being consciously aware of what you're choosing to put in your body and in what quantities and portions. I feel like intuitive eating has been like a real big buzzword, which people have been using incorrectly. I'm all for mindful eating. The issue that I have with the buzzword around mindful or intuitive eating is that people are saying it's natural, right? It's like being an intuitive eater, for example, is like part of being human. And they're like, well, when we were Neanderthals, or when we were first like brought up before we had any of what we had today, like we didn't have to think about it. We just ate intuitively. It's like, yeah, but we didn't have a pantry full of highly palatable foods available to us at any point in time. We weren't going out to restaurants and choosing what we wanted to off a menu. We were hunting for our food. We were working all day, building at where we were going to sleep. We were toiling in the fields. Like, we had a very active lifestyle, and whatever we had available to us is what we ate. Right? It wasn't really intuitive. It was based off of what we had available. So it's really not how we're built. And what we're really built for is making sure that we eat the most delicious foods that are really the most calorically dense, so that, God forbid, in a time of famine, we're okay. That's really what we're built for. Yep. So the idea of intuitive eating being something that we're just built for is actually completely incorrect. I think intuitive eating is something to strive for, but you have to learn how to do it. And it comes from years and years of learning and studying nutritional sciences, from learning the difference between proteins, carbs, and fats, learning about how many calories are in certain foods. This is something you work up to. It's not something that you're born with.
Yeah, evolutionary, like you say, hunter-gatherer man is designed to store away food for the periods of famine, the periods where we don't have access to resources. And equally, when people are like, oh, all my clients intuitively eat, really, because they came to you because they needed to lose fat, because they've been intuitively eating. That's how their intuition told them to eat up until this point, apart from the time maybe they did Slimming World or Weight Watchers, whatever it was they tried to do on a crash diet. They've been intuitively eating because they haven't been thinking about a dietary system or a meal plan or a calorie tracking goal. They've been eating intuitively and put themselves in their current position. So for you to say my clients intuitively is pretty misleading. And
it's bullshit. It's ridiculous. You tell most people to eat intuitively, and they're going to eat Papa John's intuitively. They're going to just order Domino's pizza, Papa John's. It's like, cool, like whatever tastes good, I'll eat that intuitively. Totally fine. It's real higher level intuitive eating is a tremendous amount of skill. And if we actually look at it, and to be fair, there's an entire book around what's called intuitive eating. And that book there are some parts I love and some parts I disagree with. And again, to give that book credit and the author's credit, it's not about weight loss. That's about developing a healthier relationship with food. I think a lot of people use intuitive eating, that term, for weight loss, and the intuitive eating crowd will immediately come out and be like, it's not for weight loss, blah, blah, blah. It's like, cool. So fine. It's not for weight loss. But if you have to read an entire book to learn how to intuitively eat, well, then clearly it's not intuitive. Like, that's very obvious. If you've got to read an entire book about it so that you can study it and learn how to implement the strategies, this is clearly not something ingrained within us.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Jordan. There's some sort of system or method behind that in order to enable that, because like you say, there's a learning or education piece to do that successfully. And like you say, intuitively, they're not going to make the right nutritional choices. They're probably going to under-eat protein. If we're ever asked to like guesstimate how many calories we've eaten, we all massively underestimate. And then if you're asked how many calories did you expend during exercise, we tend to massively overestimate as well. Oh, that was a 600 calorie leg session. No, it wasn't. Like, realistically, if you a high volume leg session, 300-400 calories maximum, and that's for like moving some serious load and as a pretty big guy. But I do find that funny. In terms of actual mindful eating, then that's more about the kind of presence within the meal and whatnot. Do you have any tips for people to be more mindful? Because I think a lot of the listeners are, like myself, a busy guy that maybe sits down between Zoom calls or sits down between meetings, and sometimes we can be guilty of maybe checking my phone, checking my emails, swiping on Instagram stories and checking them out, and just shoveling the food down, and almost it's like I've not even eaten sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously this is easier said than done. Like literally everything in life, everything is easier said than done. So I hate when people use that as an excuse not to do it. But I think when you're really learning to become a mindful eater, which is like being aware and present in the moment, I think number one is making sure you're sitting down for whatever meal. Like, don't be standing up, don't be at the counter, don't be walking, like sit down for your meal. And again, like I work with a lot of moms and dads who are like with brand new kids. Sometimes you're going to eat on the go. Like, that's okay. Like, I'm talking about in ideal terms here. And when you're really trying to build a healthier relationship with food. So ideally, you'll be sitting down for the meal. Ideally, the meal will fit on one plate. Like, you shouldn't having to get up like 8 times to refill your plate. If it's on one plate, you're good. Ideally, you're going to be drinking some, not alcohol. If you want alcohol, fine. But like, ideally, you're going to have some water or some like hydrating beverage during the meal, and consciously asking yourself, am I full? Am I still hungry? Like, do I want this? One of the interesting questions that I think is worth exploring is, do you want, for example, just throw out a random food. Do you want an apple right now? Like, are you hungry enough to eat an apple right now? And if you're not hungry enough to eat an apple, then you're probably satiated. Like, you're probably good to go, right? Like, it doesn't mean you can't have the Oreos. It doesn't mean you can't have a slice of cake. But if you're really wondering, are you hungry, and you're not sure, would you eat an apple? And if the answer is no, then you're not hungry. Like, and that's it.
It's a good test. It's like the apple test. You can call it that. I think you should trademark that. But it's certainly a good question. And equally, if we think about things like when you're sitting down with the water, that can break up your chewing or your eating. So you put your knife and fork down. That's kind of one of the principles I've had with mindful eating before. I think when I employ like non-mindful eating is when I'm actually actively trying to gain weight and I'm kind of pushing my calories way up. Whereas if I'm on a diet or a kind of prep for a photo shoot or something like that, I'll be much more conscious of knife and fork down between mouthfuls, chew, no screens, no Netflix, no laptop, no checking other things. And it's remarkable how much quicker that bowl of oats fills you up when you do that than when I'm sat in front of my laptop and I'm just both, and just shoveling it down like a machine.
Absolutely. Agreed completely, man.
Yeah. So one of the other areas that you mentioned, and I wasn't sure we were going to cover this, but you talked about the trend for influencers now, maybe looking a little bit more full, and they're pinching their weight and whatever. And that links to the body positivity movement. I've seen some of your content regarding that. What do you see as the pros of that movement, and what do you see as the cons of it?
Oh man, this could be a whole book. I would say, I mean, I love first and foremost the intent of the movement, which is, I think a lot of people are feeling down about themselves. I think a lot of people are harshly judging themselves. And I love the intent of like, hey, let's make people feel better. Like, I love that, because that's really, if you think about the intent of the movement, it's about, let's make people feel better. Let's like improve their mood. Let's improve their self-image. And I really appreciate and love that. And I encourage that. I think there are a number of issues with it. Number one that I see, and I think this is probably the one that's the most overlooked. You can probably hear the New York City sirens going off in the background right now. One of the reasons I'm so excited to move out of the city. One of the most overlooked negative aspects of this movement that I've seen is people saying, just love yourself as you are right now. You should just love yourself. And I see this as a major issue, not because you shouldn't love yourself, but because, practically speaking, what if someone doesn't love themselves, which many people don't. Many people are suffering with depression. Many people are suffering with mood disorders. Many people are just suffering with a lack of self-love. So when it's like telling someone like, hey, just be happy. It's like, what is wrong with you? You can't just imagine just telling, hey, just lose weight. What if someone's really struggling with it? Just eat less and move more. It's that simple. It's not that easy. Yes, I'd love for everyone just to love themselves and just be happy with their body. But realistically, most people aren't. So when you tell someone just to love yourself, if they're sitting there being like, I understand what you're saying, but I don't, now they feel bad because they feel like they're not doing something that they're supposedly supposed to. I think it does a lot more harm than good. And another aspect that comes from this is a lot of people are saying like, you're perfect as you are.
Yep.
Not a fan of that. It's like, not a fan of that at all. It's like, if you ask anyone who's in a wonderful relationship, just like they have a wonderful relationship with their significant other, and you say, what makes your significant other so great in your relationship? The first thing they'll always say is, they push me to be a better person. They make me a better person. So we all understand we are not perfect as we are. We all intuitively understand that, and we all want to be a better person. So by having this whole movement purely geared around you're perfect as you are, we're just encouraging people to be like, oh, well, you're great. You couldn't possibly be any better. It's like, well, it's a really defeatist mentality. Like, I know personally, I could be a way better person than I am. I have so much room to improve. If my fiance was just like, oh, you're perfect, there's almost something like distasteful about that. If you start dating someone and they're just like, oh my God, you are the most perfect human being I've ever met, it's like, ugh, get away from me. Like, no, I'm not. Like, I have a lot of room to improve. I want to be better. So again, I love the intent of the movement, and I think it's wonderful. I like how they really take people's feelings into account, but I think there's a lot that needs to be improved, and really understand that if you just tell someone, well, just love yourself, you're doing more harm than good. And everybody, every single one of us, myself included, especially myself, has a lot of room to improve. And we should be encouraging people to live up to their potential, not stagnating them saying, well, you're perfect as you are.
Yeah, that's a really nuanced take. And I think that's really important when we discuss a subject that could get somebody cancelled if you say it the wrong way, Jordan.
That's exactly right.
And for me, your ability to articulate that is very important as a leading figure within the fitness space, because it's not fat shaming, it's not fat phobic, it's not, but equally you're not at the other end of the spectrum where actually, if somebody is genuinely unhealthy because of their obesity, we cannot tell them they're perfect the way they are, because that's actually irresponsible. And if we're honest, at the expense of protecting people's feelings, we might be endangering their health. And you can say big is beautiful or obesity is beautiful, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Of course, you can be attractive as somebody who's overweight. However, you cannot tell somebody that you're healthy. And I think that's where the kind of challenge lies with like the body positivity, where they say health comes in all shapes and sizes. Yes, it does. But certain shapes and sizes are genuinely never going to be healthy, and you just have to accept that. And if we are measuring things by BMI, can be a crude measurement in the UK, but equally, if you're at the very extreme end of that, the chances are your internal organs and everything else going on with your blood test is going to show some significant health challenges. And whisper it, but COVID has maybe illustrated that sometimes we have to be very conscious of our obesity levels, and that can be an elephant in the room at the moment. But equally, if you look at ICU admissions, we all want to be more conscious of, are we healthy internally? Can our organs, can our systems stand up to an external disease like this?
Yeah, I couldn't possibly agree more. I think you articulated it perfectly. And if anyone disagrees with that, like they've got to take a closer look at themselves and their own biases. I could not agree more with everything you just said. You're completely accurate.
Thanks, Jordan. I think the last area for us to touch on is you are well known, particularly to me anyway, as the man that coached Gary Vee. Now, you don't coach Gary Vee anymore, but Gary Vee is one of the most busy, high energy, hype gentlemen that you see on the internet. A lot of the people listening to the podcast will class themselves as busy people, certainly not as busy as Gary. But what kind of advice would you give to people who are busy like Gary, and what did you learn from coaching somebody like that?
You know, I think from a fitness, I learned a lot from coaching Gary, but I think from a fitness perspective is number one is nobody is as busy as Gary. Like nobody. I'm in that guy's schedule. I see his schedule every day. There's nobody as a more I would not be surprised, honest to God, if any like world leader, prime minister, president, whoever was not as busy as Gary, like straight up. His schedule is insane. He has every minute blocked out, months and months and months in advance, from his shower to his Uber ride to his like everything. Every minute is blocked out. Nobody is busier than this guy. And one of the things I found is one of the actually interesting things about Gary is he hates working out. He hates it. And he will not hide it. He's like, I hate every minute of it. I do not enjoy it. And I think I love that he says that because it helps people relate to him. And I think a lot of coaches are like, well, you just got to find the exercise that you love the most. And like, yeah, I agree with that. But some people are just going to hate exercise, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just because you hate exercise is not a justification for not doing it altogether. And I think he's the prime example of someone who's found a way to still exercise, even though he hates every single minute of it. It's a battle to get him to work out. It is a fight every day as his coach. And I think one of the cool parts about the way Gary does it, and I don't think it's the right way for everybody, but for someone who's super busy every single day, is Gary basically scheduled a certain portion of his day every day towards exercise every day. And for him, this worked really well in terms of whether it was like 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever the time frame was that his assistant would block into the calendar, his workout was blocked into the calendar as essentially a meeting. And that really helped a lot because at a certain time, he's going to wake up, he's going to see, okay, my first meeting of the day, is with Jordan, or now it's with his coach, Mike. This is what I've got to do. And it was a non-negotiable. It was as though it was a meeting, whether you're having a meeting with your boss, you're having a meeting with your employees, you have a meeting with whoever it is, you have an investor meeting, you make sure you're at the meeting on time, and you make sure you're prepared for the meeting. And that's how he treated his workouts, and how he still treats his workouts. And I think that's a really important concept to carry on, especially for very busy people, whether you're a mom, you're a dad, whether you work a full-time job, 2 full-time jobs, whatever it is. If you want to exercise, you don't have to do it every day, but figure out a way to put it in your calendar as a non-negotiable. So you've got to do something.
The term non-negotiable is one that I've absolutely loved for the past year, and it's probably one of my maybe an overused phrase for me now. But building those non-negotiables into your day, like, I don't know, your morning walk before you log on for work, your workout session at lunchtime or after work, whatever, and it's in the calendar, in the diary. It's a commitment in writing. That there's a subset of people like Gary, like entrepreneurs, like business people who want to perform at their peak, who generally respond really well to calendar invites and things being in the diary like that. So would you not turn up for a meeting with your CEO or a meeting with your investment fund or whatever it is? Absolutely not. So if it's in the diary and it says, I'm turning up for my personal trainer at this time, or I'm turning up to train myself at 8 o'clock, or with a workout buddy, which can be great for accountability, it's a non-negotiable and it's in the diary. What was maybe around food with Gary? Was there anything that was particularly a big focus?
You know, with Gary, there's a lot. Gary's schedule is so unlike anybody else's schedule. So for example, what was very difficult for me when I first started is Gary would have a lot of dinner meetings. And so after his workday, starting around 5 or 6 p.m., he would leave the office and he would have like 4 dinner meetings in a row. And he'd go sit at a restaurant from like 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. or midnight, and have one dinner meeting after another at the same restaurant, same table, new people coming in, sitting down at his table, and he would have dinner with all of them. And it was very difficult because the people would order dinner, and Gary, you can't have 4 dinners. Like, that's ridiculous. You'd be eating like calories just from dinners alone. So trying to strategize, okay, how are we going to do this? And planning out when he would actually have a legitimate dinner, looking ahead of time at the menu, figuring out what he was going to order. So we would have like a sort of a rotation of 5 restaurants that he really enjoyed that were good for meetings, but also had things on the menu that he enjoyed and would fit into his calories. And then also I would make sure that he had a protein shake prior to his meals. This way he could sit there and there's a basket of bread rolls, there's whatever it is, and he's not as tempted to take them because he's filled up on a protein shake. So it's a simple strategy, but a very effective one where, who knows, maybe you're going to a Mexican food restaurant and they've got chips and guacamole out in front of you. You have a protein shake 45 minutes before you go out. You can still enjoy them, but you're not going to eat the entire basket this time. Maybe you have like 5, 6, 7 chips in appropriate portion, as opposed to eating the entire basket, then getting it refilled. That
sits up there with the Apple rule, doesn't it? As a nice Jordan Syatt strategy to help us feel full. But like you say, if you're kind of accounted for the main course and the kind of appetizers are lying there and you just go to town because you're starving, you haven't eaten since 3 o'clock and you're having dinner, you're going to go to town and you're going to blow 100%. your calorie allowance, whatever term you want to use, before you've even had your tacos at the Mexican restaurant.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's another excellent learning for us, Jordan. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I'm sure the listeners have as well. If those that haven't already had the pleasure to follow you, where's the best place for them to head towards?
Yeah, man, this has been great. You've been a wonderful host, man. I loved it. You can find me on my own podcast, the Jordan Syatt Mini Podcast, my YouTube. If you Google search my name, Jordan Syatt, you're going to find literally every social media account in the world.
Superb. We will link the podcast in the show notes below and your Instagram. For those that have enjoyed it, please take a screenshot, tag me at call.cambro, and please tag Jordan as well. I'm sure he would enjoy the feedback from this side of the pond. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.